In this video, we're going to finish off our flowchart for naming molecules and compounds. In the last video, we talked about ionic compounds, so that's when you have either a metal or ammonium present. You don't use prefixes, and we've already done that. In this one, we're going to focus on the rest. So if it's only nonmetals, right, you have to ask yourself one other question. Does it start with H? If it does start with an H, you have an acid, and there's a set of rules for that we'll go over in a minute. If it doesn't start with H, then you just have an ordinary covalently bound molecule, which is a sharing of electrons. And for that, you have a system. So we'll start over here, because it's pretty simple. Acids are a little bit more complicated, but not that bad. So general format is you say a prefix, unless it's mono, then the name of the element, then the prefix for the second element, its name, and you change the ending to IDE. So the prefixes you can see listed here. Mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, deca. So you just use those to describe how many of that atoms of that element you have within the molecule. So in CO2, which is a very common molecule, you know is carbon dioxide. So since the first one would be mono, you don't have to say it. So that the element is carbon, you have two oxygens in there, so you say dioxide. If you had CO, you would have carbon monoxide. So you do say the mono if it's the second element, but not the first. N2O5, dinitrogen pentoxide. You can contract it. If you have two vowels next to each other, like penta, then oxide, you can just condense that into pentoxide. And we do that multiple times. Monooxide, same deal, you just say monoxide. CCl4 would be carbon tetrachloride, because tetra is what represents the number 4. You don't need to say the mono for carbon because it's the first element. Now, if you have an acid, like I said, it starts with an H, you have two real categories. So you have, is it binary, which means it's only two elements, so it would be H with one other atom, or essentially it's going to make an ion. And the system for that is you would say hydroblankic acid. So if you have HCl, which we've used many times, that's hydrochloric acid. HF, hydrofluoric acid. H with any other individual element, you would say hydro, then whatever the name of the element is, ic acid. However, if you have more than two elements, that indicates you have a polyatomic ion present. And then you have to look at what that polyatomic ion ends in. So if the polyatomic ion ends in ate, we call that blank ic acid. If it ends in ite, we call it a blank us acid. And that blank is whatever would represent that ion, right? So HNO3 has nitrate in it. So we would call it nitric acid. SO4 is sulfate, starts with H, so it's going to be sulfuric acid. Notice that sulfate is a -2 ion, so you're going to need two H's to balance it out, because essentially you can think of hydrogen and an acid as being a +1 charge. So nitrate was -1, so you only need one H. Sulfate, -2, so you need two H's. And then if we took the ite forms of those, NO2 is nitrite, we'd call that nitrous acid. SO3 is sulfite, so that'd be sulfurous acid. Right? And then there are some polyatomic ions that end in IDE, like cyanide. And if it ends in IDE, then you just follow the system for binary. So like HCN would be hydrocyanic acid. So that's how to name the rest of the compounds we have or molecules that we have. Use these two videos in conjunction with each other to kind of help you review for everything.